My alarm awakens me at 6 a.m., as it does every morning. I sit up with a yawn and take inventory of myself and my surroundings, as I do every morning. The bunker where I spend my life is cement-floored with cinder block walls, a bleak grey color. It is lit with a sickly pale white light from the overhead fluorescent tubes. My sleeping quarters are small and Spartan, like a monk's cell in a monastery. My bed is a military single coat. There is a bookcase that contains paperback books that were once the favorite of my all too few distractions, but having read each one of them numerous times, now fills me up with irrational rage whenever I lay my eyes upon them. There are no surprises left in those books. I know each line for line, every flat character, every trite plot twist, every insipid romance and past dramatic contrivance and tiresome action cliché. The monotony they offer now drives me to madness. Someday I'll burn these goddamn books and use the wood from the bookcase to construct something more useful. A coffin, maybe. I stand and go to the calendar on the wall, the calendar I drew by my hand, like every calendar I've had since the second year after I first came down here, so long ago, and cross out yesterday. An endless series of X's spanning my pages, many years. Distantly, I can recall the first calendar that had adorned on this cinder block wall. It had been printed and colorful. The month on display had been July. The illustration depicted a Norman Rockwell-esque family at a 4th of July picnic. That had been many Julys ago, back when there had still been the foolish optimism that calendars would be needed, the naive belief that there would be a tomorrow to look forward to, someone there to turn the page to next month. I leave the bedroom, down the narrow hallway into the bathroom. I stare into my own reflection in the mirror. I stare at the lines of aging in my face, the grey in my receding hairline. I no longer recognize my own face. It's a stranger looking back at me with the hard, cynical, war-weary eyes of a long-time survivor. I had been a young man when I left the world above, still naive and carefree, hopeful for the future, not realizing this was all the future there would be ever to hope for. I shaved the graying stubble off my coarse-skinned cheeks with my electric razor, brushed my teeth. I have to be careful with my teeth because there are no longer any dentists. With the frayed and worn toothbrush I should have replaced long ago. Floss, then head into the main room which serves as my office, living room and recreation area. It is by far the most spacious area in the entire bunker. The walls are plastered with yellowed newspaper articles. Scientists struggle to find explanation for ongoing crisis, headlines, 400 million dead worldwide, magazine covers, an oil painting of Christ with his hands raised, face heavenward, expression mournful, the caption, "Pray for our souls." There is a desk on which sits my radio equipment, a couch which sits before my TV and DVD player, a table and chair where I take my meals. The corners are cluttered with tools, spare electrical components, repair manuals, medical supplies, guns and ammunition, extra light bulbs and batteries, everything else I need down here to maintain my limited standard of life. I cross the main room and enter my small kitchen. My jaded eyes consider the racks stocked with their stores of non-perishable foodstuffs. I don't have to ever worry about running out. Even after all these years, it seems I have hardly put a dent in my rations. There's enough to last me another 50 years. Provided I live that long, God help me. I laugh hollowly at the last thought. What God? If he had even been there to begin with, he had stopped keeping score long ago, had written off the human race as a failed experiment. He had proven that when it had happened. Pray for our souls, indeed. Even though I have plenty of food, my meals have become as tedious and unexciting as every other aspect of my life in my shelter. My food is bland and nearly tasteless. Military-grade MRE and freeze-dried emergency stuff mostly. I have been sustained by them for so long, I no longer recall what real food once tasted like. I wistfully long for the long-forgotten scent of a fresh orange, the juicy warmth of a fresh-cooked steak. Stop it! I interrupt myself harshly. Just stop. It won't change anything. I fill a pan with water from the sink. The water is drawn from a pump supplied by an artesian well. Tear open a bag that alleges to contain scrambled eggs. Dump the anonymous-looking powder into the pan. Place it on my butane-fueled stove. As I wait for it to heat, I prepare a cup of instant coffee and sip it. When my eggs are finished, I pour them onto a tin plate and carry them into the other room, sitting down at my table, eating slowly and mechanically. When what passes for breakfast is finished, I get up, by force of habit, go to my radio unit. I turn it on, listen to the endless silence emanating from the speakers. I push the send button on the microphone and speak. Is anyone there? Can you hear me? Over. I wait, listen, repeat my transmission. There is no response. There never is. The last transmission had been eons ago. A man sobbing and whimpering incoherent words, ignoring the questions I had asked him. Before his sobbing had turned to shrill, undulating shrieks of horror, carnage, ragged cries of pure terror and agony. Silence had followed. Unending silence. But still, even after all this time, some part of me refuses to lose hope. I turn on my portable AM/FM radio, sweeping the dial slowly, carefully on both hands, listening, but again, there is only silence. The last radio broadcast had been a news report. The president had committed suicide in the Oval Office. Full chaos had descended upon the world and there had been no hope left by then. Less than 6 months after the first few isolated incidents had been reported, civilization had crumbled like a child's sandcastle at high tide. The news broadcaster said he wasn't sure how much longer he would be able to remain on the air. I had switched the radio off, gone to bed. The next morning, there had been only static. Eventually, even that had stopped. Then the airwaves had been dead silent. That's when I knew the end had finally come. I get up to the shelf housing my vast collection of DVDs. I select an old favorite and pop it into my player. I sit down on my couch, watch the film without really seeing it, unengaged. For a few minutes, I try to fool myself. I try to pretend I'm an ordinary human, in an ordinary world, kicking back on a Saturday afternoon, watching a comedy classic in the privacy of my own house. It doesn't work. It never does. I watch with dead eyes. I wish I could still find it humorous, but there really isn't anything to laugh about anymore. Watching a film I've seen countless times before, knowing that all the actors are dead, their death had been unspeakably horrific. I might as well be watching a film starring a cast of ghosts. The thought creeps me out. Without really thinking about it, I take a creased and crinkled photograph out of my pocket and study it. The boy I had once been, smiling. When was the last time that I smiled? with my arms around the pretty blonde girl with the heart-shaped face, the pale blue eyes, and the wistful smile of her own. Claire. I feel a pang in some obscure corner of my heart that hasn't been hardened yet to stone. I stroke her face gently with the tip of my finger. If only you had stayed with me. If only you could be here with me now. I don't cry though. My tears dried up long ago. Her name was Claire. She was from Paris, studying abroad at my university. I met her in my sophomore year. For the next year we had been inseparable. She had been teaching me to speak French. I was going to live with her in Paris after graduation. Then, it had begun. She was afraid for her family and had taken the next plane back to France. Just before martial law had been declared and all flights grounded, all transportations in and out of the country blocked off, before the bloodshed and panic and riots in the streets. My last image of her, racing frantically down the concourse to the departure gate, ignoring my cries of protest, casting a last glance back at me, her eyes frightened, waving briefly before disappearing forever. I never saw her again. I know in my heart she died like everyone else. I just hope her death had been relatively quick and painless, that she had perhaps taken her own life when it had become obvious there was no hope left. I dread the alternative. If the degenerate elements of society that had risen up in the last few days, taken advantage of the breakdown of law and order, the rapists and looters and marauders and psychopaths, hadn't gotten to her, well, then her end had even been worse. I should have gone with you. We could have faced that end together. I put away the photo and just sit there, staring blankly at the TV. The movie is over. The DVD switched back to the menu screen. I wonder, not for the first time, if I might be the only one left anywhere now. It still seems plausible that there might be a few scattered others left, cowering underground in their own bunkers and bomb shelters. But even if there are, how can I ever hope to meet them hiding here underground myself? I wonder if after all this time it might be safe to finally leave my shelter. I briefly considered climbing up the ladder, unscrewing the heavy steel hatch and stepping outside for the first time in an eternity, basking in the warm rays of the sun, breathing in the fresh air. I cut the tempting thought off. I don't even dare leave here. They move so fast, can appear so quickly, literally out of nowhere. I wouldn't have time to retreat back underground. I know I'm going to die down here. Sometimes I wonder why the loneliness and isolation and the endless repetition of days hasn't driven me insane. Maybe I've adapted to this nightmare, become accustomed to it. They say if a man spends too much time in prison, when he finally gets out he doesn't want to leave, because life inside a prison is all he understands by that point. The outside world's too strange and frightening. Or maybe I'm just tougher than I thought I was. Maybe I was born a natural survivor. I laugh at that. Surviving from what? What did I hope to accomplish out of this? Why hadn't I picked up one of those guns sitting in the corner and ended it once and for all? Was I still holding out for a miracle to happen? I get up and re-enter the kitchen, crossing to the small room that houses a generator that supplies power to the bunker. I check it to make sure it doesn't require any maintenance. It seems to be in proper working order. A fuel line is hooked to the generator, supplying it with diesel from the underground reserve tank. like my water supply. There is no need to worry about running out of fuel, provided I use my electricity moderately. A sound suddenly startles me, causing my heart to jump. I know what that sound is instantly, but it's so alien, so shocking in its unexpectedness. For a moment, my mind refused to believe it's real. The sound of fists clanging frantically against steel, a hollow booming. Someone is pounding on the outer edge of the bunker. For a moment, I am frozen in action. Then I force myself to move, hurrying into the main room, the sound becoming louder and more distinct. I also hear something else, a voice, muffled by the thick steel but still clear.
Is anyone there? Open up! Let me in!
I can hear the edge of shrill panic in that voice. Abruptly, I remember the surveillance camera rigged outside the hatch, hooked to the TV. I go and switch it on, changing it to the proper channel. It's been so long since I last checked the feed. I wonder if the camera even still functions. The camera still works, although the image is broken by infrequent ripples of distortion. I see who is outside my refuge. A girl, her clothes filthy and tattered, hair matted and unwashed. She is dreadfully thin. She looks to be in her early 20s. And now I realize she must have been born sometime after this nightmare began. Born into this hellish reality of brute survival and struggle and unending terror. The world that once was not even a distant memory to her. I feel a twinge of pity for her. She pounds at the hatch, tries to force it open to no avail. This bunker had been designed to withstand a nuclear blast head-on. She keeps casting fearful glances behind her, and I know she's being hunted.
Open up! Let me in! Hurry!
And then, I see what she's been seeking to escape. It appears 10 feet behind her, literally materializing out of thin air. I still don't know if they're actually teleporting themselves across space, or phasing through some dimensional barrier, or if it's just some kind of invisibility screen they use to sneak up on their prey. No one ever learned much about them. There hadn't been enough time. And as far as I know, none of the scientists ever captured a specimen for controlled study. I look at it, feeling a stirring of the old fear I thought I had forgotten long ago. It had been so long since I had seen one of them. I had forgotten how grotesque they were. It was at least 8 feet tall and terribly gaunt, its arms unnaturally long, its spindly fingers ending in talons. Vaguely humanoid in appearance, its naked, mottled skin was a dead grey color, the black lines of veins clearly outlined, like roads on a map. Its features drawn tight and skeletal over its elongated skull. Its eyes were empty black sockets. Its mouth, a wide black maw lined with jagged, pointy teeth. It began to approach the girl, who was unaware of its presence, unaware of the danger behind her. As a younger and more idealistic man, I know I wouldn't have hesitated to climb the ladder and open the hatch, admitting her to the safety of my shelter. I perhaps would have welcomed her companionship, the presence of a female ally. Perhaps we would have become lovers and repopulated the vacant world, Adam and Eve, a warm, lighted union against the cold, crushing starkness of existence. But that young man and his romantic notions are long dead. I'm old now, and I've become territorial to my space. I don't want an intruder in my private realm. Besides, I'm not sure if the food and fuel supplies could hold out between the two of us. Perhaps It's better that it ends here for her, no matter how hideous it will be. What exactly does she want to go on living for anyway? When the creature was 5 feet away from her, something alerts her to it, and she spins and sees it. Reacting with a scream, she turns back and begins to pound with wild urgency as it closes in. I hear her terrified shrieks.
Help me! For God's sake, help! Don't let it!
I switch the channel so I don't have to watch what comes next.
Get away from me! Don't touch me!
Her words end in a long, blood-curdling scream that trails off to a groan. Then silence. Faintly, I can hear it begin to feed. I feel sick. It passes quickly. I wishfully consider that this could just be some extraordinarily long, elaborate nightmare. One day I'll wake up, the young man I was in the lighted world of fresh air, the world sane and stable, or as sane and stable as it had been under the best of circumstances, as it had been before. I shake the thought away. Such daydreams are a luxury I cannot afford. I've always been a realist. I remember when it all started. The first reports had come from a small town in southwest Texas, near the Mexican border. Bell. That was the name of the town. Bell, Texas. Funny to think how the end of the world had begun in some nowhere little burg no one had ever heard of before. Reports no one had really paid much attention to at first, because it didn't seem real. Murders being committed by strange creatures that seemed to appear out of nowhere. No one had paid attention until the first few scattered incidents in other places. Buenos Aires, Rome, Istanbul, Cape Town, San Diego, California, Brest, France, Arklow, Ireland, Perth, Australia, then everywhere else. Then people had begun to pay attention, but it had been already too late. Had been perhaps from the start. They appeared out of nowhere, killed and ate, then found someone else, and killed and ate some more. As far as I know, no one had ever discovered a way to kill them. Our weapons had no effect. The army and National Guard had been powerless. No one ever knew what they were. Aliens? Demons from hell itself? Extra-dimensional beings? Did it even matter? Or where they had come from? Why were they here now? And they'll probably never leave. Not until we're all dead and their food supply is exhausted. No barricades had worked against them. No matter how secure your location, they just could appear inside whenever they pleased. The one thing the government discovered about them was, for whatever reason, they never appeared underground. I look at my watch. It's going on 5 p.m. I get up and unenthusiastically set up preparing for my dinner. Pot roast, the bag claims. It looks more like dehydrated dog food to me, and probably won't taste much better. I shrug inwardly, resigned. That's life. What I did might seem heartless to you, assuming there's any of you left to read this, but that's just the way things are now in this brave new world. Only the strong survive. There's no room for compassion or mercy. I am practical. I am pragmatic. Most of all, I am a survivor.